Xtalks is the industry leader in connecting life science, food, healthcare, and medical device professionals. The Xtalks Life Science podcast features insightful conversations with industry experts about all things pharma, biotech, and more.
Hello and welcome to the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. I'm Ayesha Rashid, Senior Life Science Journalist at Xtalks.com, and this week I'm delighted to introduce a very special guest on the show. We have with us today Lawreen Asuncion, who is a patient advocate who works to raise awareness for the rare disease Usher syndrome. Usher syndrome affects hearing and vision in most individuals and also balance for some as well. Lawreen has worked professionally in the biotech and life science markets for over 25 years. She provides input and perspectives for rare genetic disease programs and clinical trials sponsored by biotech and pharma companies. Having Usher syndrome type 2C, Lawreen is passionate about fostering awareness around Usher syndrome and supporting research for rare genetic diseases. So to learn more about Lawreen's journey at the professional and personal levels, let's turn to her now. Lawreen, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure, and thank you for the opportunity.
So Lawreen, I am very intrigued by your story, by your journey, both as a biotech and life science professional and as a patient advocate, because we mostly see one or the other in each particular space, but for you to be working in both spaces and merging the two areas and through the work that you do, I'd love to hear more about that journey and really what it entails to be both a patient advocate and a biotech life science professional developing treatments and working in the space for treatments for Usher syndrome.
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe the way I can set the stage a little bit is just share with you very briefly my actual patient journey, if you will, kind of how it came about and what it was like growing up with this. Then from there, I can probably go more into the professional side and kind of how I'm looking to merge the two a lot more. So for myself, someone with Usher syndrome, when I was young, I actually didn't know that's what it was. My first indication was my mom noticed that I had a hearing loss. It was when I was a young child in a nursery. I seemed to ignore a lot of noises that are common. Most infants would respond to noises, other people crying, TV, all those type of noises. And she noticed that I ignored everything. So that was kind of a red flag. So after some research, she actually ended up bringing me to a hearing and speech center where I was, at 4 years old, I was fitted with hearing aids. They actually had diagnosed me with bilateral sensory neural hearing loss. And what that means is there's nerve damage in my inner ears. So after being fitted with hearing aids, and I went through speech therapies for a number of years, I continued through regular school, grade school, high school, and college. I actually first fell in love with science in high school. It was actually a genetic course. And that particular subject just completely fascinated me. It's simple, yet it's so complex. And so as I went through school and college, it was an area that I really was always continuously drawn to. And kind of what ended up helping me transition from my educational part of my life into professional was my first job was actually at the government lab, Lawrence Livermore. And at the time, this was back in, I know I'm aging myself, but this was early 90s. I was actually able to join the Human Genome Project. And so that was actually a really tremendous opportunity where working there as a scientist, contributing to actual genomic research. And yeah. So from there, that was where I started to realize there could be an opportunity to dive more into the subject that I love so much. And so I did continue to do that. Now, how it actually started overlapping with Usher syndrome was, as I started my career, personally, my eye doctors at the time also, you go for your regular checkup, and they started noticing something odd in the back of my retina. Visually, for me, I didn't notice anything different. Everything seemed fine. However, when they were imaging the back of my eye as part of a checkup, they started noticing what they call spicules in the back of the eye. It kind of looked like maybe tadpoles and things like that. There was only a few, but this was in my early 20s, and at the time, the optometrist noticed them. We made a note, and we made plans to monitor, but he really did not have any clue as to the cause, where to come from, or why do you have this. And what we had noticed was over time, like the following year and so on, he noticed a little bit more. That obviously it was growing, but again, that the lack of information was there. Like he had no clue what this was. And so that continued for, I would say, at least another 10 plus years. In that amount of time, I actually ended up learning from my family members that there was a history of Usher syndrome. And the reason this came about was I have an aunt, my mom's side, who was diagnosed with Usher syndrome. And for her, when she hit 40, her vision especially rapidly declined to the point where she really had to stop a number of things, including driving. And it affected her life so much that she was very nervous that I was going to go down the same path. So she shared the information with me. And with that in hand, I then kind of was a little bit motivated to try and find some additional specialists to help me figure out, one, give me the diagnosis, and two, figure out, what are my options? Am I going to go down the same path as her? What can I expect? So that journey took a while, because at the time, genetic testing was around, but you can imagine a lot of times you can't just walk into the clinic and say, hey, I would like a genetic test. It needs to be ordered or referred from one of your doctors. And I wasn't referred to a retina specialist until another 10 years down the road. But at the time, I think once I was introduced and made an appointment at the retina center, I think things accelerated pretty quickly from there. My initial appointment with the gentleman that was my doctor, he was very knowledgeable on retinal diseases. There's many of them, inherited retinal diseases, so many variations. However, for my particular case, being Usher syndrome, it was something new for him. And so my initial appointment, I knew more than he did. However, we talked about it, and he apparently went home and did some research. And by the time I had a follow-up appointment, he was much more knowledgeable, and we went from there. The opportunity for me with genetic testing came about because at one point, Blueprint Genomics and Invitae, I think, had a partnership where they were offering free genetic testing for people who inherit retinal diseases or disorders. And we took advantage of that, went ahead and ordered a kit, did the genetic testing, and the results came back in early 2021. And that was when I actually got an official diagnosis, because when I was reading through the report, it gave you obviously information on mutations that you have in your own genetic makeup. And for me, because I already had done some research, I was aware of some of the common genes that can be associated with Usher syndrome. And you see them black and white, it's kind of, I would say in some ways it was I wish I could say, in some ways it was a little bit of a relief, to be honest.
Yeah.
Part of it wasn't an eye-opener. Like, okay, now I know what I'm working with.
Yeah, exactly.
Part of it was a little bit, you have a little bit of sadness, but you're like, oh, I really do have this. Can't get away from it. But I think for me, coming from a science background, I mostly felt relieved because it gave me something to hook onto. Like, okay, right. I've got a particular mutation. I'm going to go and learn everything I can about it.
Lawreen, thank you so much for sharing your journey, your personal journey with Usher syndrome. Again, very eye-opening, and glad you got the diagnosis so that you know what you're working with now. And so as a life science professional and someone who's, working in the science space in drug development, clinical trials, could you tell us a bit more about the science of Usher syndrome and the genetics of it, as well as you alluded to and mentioned?
Yes, of course. So Usher syndrome is a syndrome that affects multiple aspects of hearing and vision and balance, and a lot of it is driven by a mutation in a very specific gene. To date, there are 12 or 13 genes that have been known and accepted, and have been confirmed to be associated with Usher syndrome. Of course, the adaptation is over time, we may discover more. But one of the most powerful things I think with any genetic disease, including Usher syndrome, is first understanding what genes are responsible for your particular case. Because from there, a lot of therapies nowadays are very gene specific. You definitely hear of researchers looking into gene agnostic treatment, but I think in reality, where we are today, I think the more effective one would be targeting your specific gene. So in this case, let me talk about my own type. So I have Usher type 2C. So for my type, it is the ADGRV1 is actually it codes for a protein. And what it does is when you have a gene that has a mutation, when it codes for a protein, what happens is it kind of breaks that mechanism. So because the gene has the wrong code, it cannot produce the protein effectively. And so that ends up messing things up. So in this case, a lot of genes, what they do is the potential treatment is what you would like to do is be able to replace that defective gene and a mutated gene with a good copy. And a lot of research that I have read to date, people have been looking at very creative ways. Some have been looking for, in the early days, the research has been focused on how can you potentially give patients some function, maybe visual function or hearing function, but it wasn't focused on gene therapy because that obviously had been a lot more developed recently. In the earlier days, the research has been focused on solutions such as maybe implant, a retina chip. There's been a lot of also maybe potential use of prosthetic or artificial devices, things like that. I think nowadays, what I believe is going to be very powerful is there's been a lot of advancement in cell and gene therapy space recently. And obviously, in this case, gene therapy would apply. And what I have read is there has been some publication recently of people using biodelivery. So it's basically AAV delivery as a means to bring a good copy of a gene to replace the bad one. The challenge that I have read with the genes for Usher syndrome is some of them are the genes, they are large. And what I mean by that is when you are working with a virus like an AAV, they can only accommodate, the package can only accommodate so much material in there. And so these researchers, what they have been evaluating is the use of dual AAV. So to take the gene, break it up into small pieces, if you will, and use two different AAVs to encompass, let's say, the first half and the second half, and use that as your treatment path. And there has been actually very promising results. The thing that I'm very, very excited about in seeing this progress, I am hopeful that somewhere along the line, somebody will also be working the gene that I have. Maybe one day there might be the potential of being in a clinical trial or something like that. But I think that the opportunity for gene therapy is relatively straightforward. There is so much research and focus in that area right now. I think the progress is going to be really astounding over the next few years. And last but not least, I would say when it comes to potential treatment, I just started reading about this. I don't know a whole lot about it yet, but I think there's also going to be potential. I've read about people actually synthesizing or making, delivery via.
So basically, like an alternative to AAV vectors would be lipid nanoparticles.
Exactly.
As a delivery mechanism.
Exactly. So in addition to the promise of, continued progress using AAV, another opportunity I have started to read about is people leveraging lipid nanoparticles as a potential vehicle for this. So it's a very exciting time, and that's part of my interest in. So maybe what I think might work well here. I mean, to me, that's the bulk of it. It's really just, like I said, a lot of research we're focusing on other methods that I think could be very promising. But I really truly believe that with the progress that gene therapy, with the progress that has been made and that I've read about in gene therapy today, I personally believe that's the way to go. That word.
Indeed. Yeah. And that makes sense because it's for genetic diseases, you have to target the underlying cause, which is,
Exactly.
Are the genes that are responsible for the pathogenesis of the disease. So
exactly
that's definitely where things are going for most genetic diseases. And do you know anything about maybe gene editing approaches like CRISPR being a potential way to also target the genes involved in Usher syndrome?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think in theory makes a lot of sense. For myself, I haven't come across a lot of publications talking about the use of that particular method or technique. But it's something that I'm definitely looking to read more about and understand.
Granted, it's a newer technology. Yeah, for sure. No, that's great. So, Lawreen, what motivated you to become a formal patient advocate for Usher syndrome? Of course, having gone through the journey and finally being diagnosed with it, and then working in the field, on the science, and telling us about all of the approaches you're excited about that we can see potentially as therapies for the condition. But on the patient advocacy side, what motivates you? What motivated you and continues to motivate you to lead in that space as well?
Sure. So I first started, maybe to explain this a little bit better, I first discovered Usher Syndrome Coalition back in 2020. This was around a time where I had submitted the genetic testing, but waiting for the results to come back. And I was looking for additional resources. Who can I speak with and things like that. And I came across the coalition, and I ended up speaking with the executive director, found an opportunity to actually volunteer with them. At the time, in the beginning, they were looking for a little bit more of marketing help and things like that, which I have a background in. But over time, what I do a lot more of now is actually taking the recent publication that are put out there on either retinitis pigmentosa, which is the visual part, or on Usher syndrome as a whole, and kind of summarizing those particular pieces for the Usher community. And that was something I did on a volunteer basis, and I felt it was very rewarding because if you think about it, for myself, I feel like it's a unique case because I have a scientific background. So I understand better the premise of it, the genetics of it, what it means, things like that. And what I had discovered through volunteer with Usher syndrome is a lot of these patients or their families, they are not from a scientific space. And so the challenge there is the diagnosis very, very often catches them completely off guard. And it can be extremely overwhelming because here you are now telling this patient, you are affected with a disorder that's going to take away potentially 2 of the senses. And so it's a lot to take in. There's also what I have seen is a lot of, unfortunately, some misinformation online simply because, nowadays there's a lot of information on the internet. And so my work with the Usher Syndrome Coalition was focused on that first. How I transitioned to the patient advocacy was initially an opportunity through Foundation Fighting Blindness. They are one of the partners that also works with Usher Syndrome Coalition. And they actually had put out a call to look for patients that have Usher syndrome to participate in a council that they're putting together. And in thinking about this, I realized that was possibly another way that I can use my experience, if you will, my personal experience, as well as my understanding of scientific background, and kind of help drive this kind of, it's almost like help create more awareness and do my part. And so I went ahead and submitted my name in for the council. I was selected as one of a number of people. And that call actually, honestly, was very, very inspiring because then I it really confirmed my initial feeling, when trying to help the family that I came across with Usher Syndrome Coalition, which is I can make a difference. I can share my experiences. That's one. But the other part of it is knowing what I know about the research community, from my years of being in the space. I also recognize that the reality is the more rare your genetic disease or disorder is, the reality is the less people that are going to be studying it. It's not because people don't want to solve for it, but, unfortunately, with our world today, there's so many things out there. And sometimes it's a business decision. For example, cancer. There's so much wonderful research going on there. So my goal, what I was thinking about is if I can be a patient advocate and kind of help tell that story, raise more awareness, then maybe one day slowly people will start to realize that there's another opportunity to, address it. What's really exciting, Ayesha, also is there had been recent progress in the research space that may not be specifically associated with Usher syndrome, but I think still shows a lot of promise. And what I mean by that is recently Akuo and Regeneron both have candidates that are in a clinical trial, and they were actually looking to address a gene called OTOF, or otoferlin. That one is really about genetic hearing loss only. However, in my mind, I said, yeah, there's not Usher syndrome, but there's a lot of parallels. You are looking for a way to address the, a mutated gene, in a genetic hearing loss environment. So seeing the success that they've had so far, again, is very, very promising. And that's another angle to the patient advocacy is like, how can I get people excited about that? And I also have them realize it's a small jump, hopefully, from being able to address this particular gene to the other genes, like the 12 or 13 that we have that are related. So that's kind of my hope is that one is helping to educate the research community, but two is also very much giving back to the Usher, the patient community, helping them however I can through the journey.
As a patient advocate leader, what specific initiatives or projects are you currently working on to help raise awareness about Usher syndrome and to help patients who have the condition? So what specific initiatives?
So right now, for me, my patient advocacy journey is relatively new. It's something that I had started just earlier this year. I decided to take the step to explore how that can contribute. The first one was an opportunity with Paracel. They were the ones who actually were looking for participants in the council. And from there, a lot of that discussion, I can't go into a lot of detail because it's confidential, but just give you a gist of it. They wanted the opportunity to speak with patients, understand some of the challenges and some of the ways that they need to keep in mind accommodation, for example. During clinical trial program, how can you make it effective for the patient, knowing that they might be struggling with vision and or hearing? So I think that's one of the things that would be very important when it comes to working with patients with Usher syndrome. It's complicated because you have multiple levels that you need to account for. And you can imagine, I'm relatively lucky. I feel like I'm blessed. Vision, I'm fine. Hearing, the hearing aid are superb. But there definitely have patients who are in a totally different state. And some of them, maybe because of a type, they might be legally blind, or they might be close to deaf or extremely hard of hearing. So in those cases, you can imagine if they are to participate, even visiting healthcare professionals and or wanted to consider a clinical trial program, there's a lot of accommodation that needs to be made for them. So it is helpful to have a dialogue, with these partners and the companies that are looking to maybe implement these programs in the near future, so that we can make it as successful as possible for them, but also make the experience as friendly, if you will, as easy as possible for the patient. I feel like from the patients that I've engaged with, everyone wants to help. Most patients I come across with, and appreciate the opportunity to share the journey or the thought and to share what would help them. But if it doesn't translate, into changes or an accommodation, then at the end of the day, I think the patient will come away extremely frustrated and go, yeah, I tried, I give up. I'm just gonna, it's like they wouldn't want to put in the effort anymore. And so as part of my journey in the patient advocacy, one of the things I'd like to accomplish is trying to be that bridge, kind of provide that voice for them. And also for myself, what I'm also looking to explore is, because I've been in the biotech and life science space for so long, I built up a network, through my career. And I'm hoping that over time, maybe some of these networks can help me make some progress in connecting with the right people and kind of either supporting the program,
And so, Lawreen, you mentioned the importance of really connecting patients with the research and vice versa. So how, in your opinion, what are the best approaches to do that? So how do you bring together researchers, healthcare professionals, and organizations to advance the understanding and treatment options for Usher syndrome?
That's a really good question. From what I've seen so far, there's not a lot of opportunities to have all of the right stakeholders together.
Stakeholders, yeah.
I am starting to see some opportunities. Like, for example, with my involvement with Parcel and other ones, I'm hoping to bridge that gap. I will share that from what I know, there is one opportunity today, which is, at least from Usher Syndrome Coalition side, they do put on a conference every other year, which is called the Usher Connection Conference. A lot of it is for the patient community, but actually they also have a lot of their partners, including industry partners there. And that is the opportunity where it gives them a platform to showcase and share their research and their progress, but also, it's in person. They can actually interact with the Usher community as well, the patient community, get more out of it. But I would say that it's a great conference. I myself, unfortunately, was not able to attend the one that just happened. But it's every other year, because, as you can imagine, with any conference, a lot of work goes into planning and getting that to happen. What I would love to see and what I would like to explore is, could there be opportunity to maybe potentially even do periodic virtual meeting, something a little bit less, a smaller commitment, where you don't have to necessarily fly somewhere, for a few days. But I think the opportunity to have more constant engagement between the right stakeholders would help a lot. With Usher syndrome being so rare, I think there's a lot of opportunity on both sides for the patient to share their story, what they're looking for, what they're struggling with, to the researchers and or industry partners that are working in this space. And then I think with that together, we can probably make progress, move a lot faster.
So, Lawreen, you mentioned some of the things that you're excited about on the science end for Usher syndrome. So what are some of the things that you're excited about to see, or that you look forward to seeing in the next coming years on the patient advocacy side? What challenges need to be overcome? What approaches, strategies would you like to see as a patient advocate, as a patient, and how to bring the science and advocacy together? What are the kinds of things that you'd like to see in the coming years?
That's a good question. What I would love to see, and I've experienced a little bit of this, is it took me a little bit of time to get comfortable with coming out and sharing my story like this. My experience is, when people will meet me, throughout all the careers and positions that I've held, sooner or later you'll figure it out. There's only so much I can do with hiding, hearing loss. However, I am a type of person who's like, that doesn't matter. I can do my job well. I'm not going to put it out there. However, as I've gotten older and, been more exposed to the coalition, the recent opportunities with Parcel, I realized that there might be an opportunity to turn this around. But to your point and the question that you had, what I actually have also realized is there's always a question in the back of my mind, honestly, on it's just going to come back and bite me in my butt, or in a manner of speaking. And the reason I say that is it's categorized as a disability. And I think in today's world, people are much more open and receptive to all different types of disabilities. Yet at the same time, people still have conscious or unconscious biases and things like that. So what I would love to see being a patient advocate is, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, more progress for Usher syndrome, more opportunities to interface with the industry partners, help support the program, be more involved in that, to make it successful. And also, I think it helps the patient community understand what's happening. It gives them hope to say, hey, there are actually multiple programs or trials happening in the Usher syndrome space. But last but not least, what I really hope to see as well, just from a patient side, more acceptance of, how should I say this, is I personally don't look at it as a disability. As everyone has something that they're dealing with.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. And it shouldn't be what you judge anybody on.
No.
If anything, it just makes them unique.
Yeah.
And I would love to see more of that, and realize that we all have our strength and what we bring to the table. You don't let that term get in the way, getting to know that person and what they can do. So, and I'm hoping that through the patient advocacy work that, we can chip away at that particular hurdle as well.
That's wonderful. And I think that's what the essence of diversity is. We hear about diversity and inclusion and all of that, but this is the essence of it. It's like all of our unique qualities, all of our unique features that make us us. And
exactly.
We're able to bring, with that background, our experiences and our strengths and our weaknesses, which are so important because we learn from them, we grow, and all of that is so important. And I love how you put that that acceptance and that normalization is so important. So
exactly. Well, thank you so much.
Lawreen, thank you so much for this conversation and for opening up and sharing your journey and, again, bringing your professional background to the table in the sciences and really merging that so beautifully with the patient advocacy work that you're doing in the space as well. Wish you the best of luck and looking forward to learning and hearing more about the coming milestones and developments that from your end. So we'll definitely be in touch and would love to learn more as you go along.
Well, thank you again, Ayesha, for both you and Xtalks for this opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. That's the end of this episode of the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. If you liked today's show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.
To join the Xtalks community, visit xtalks.com and register for exclusive access to curated content like live webinars, news articles, and educational videos. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers sharing them and should not be taken as professional advice, nor do they necessarily reflect the policy or position of Honeycomb Worldwide. For further information, email us at podcast@xtalks.com.